Because I started releasing to YouTube previously unreleased segments of the documentary Death Park, people are showing up on my channel and seeing these and commenting without knowing the full context. So let me give you some quick background if in fact you are interested in the rest of the story. This is all taking place inside of a national park unit, Point Reyes National Seashore. And a section of that seashore was used to try and bring back a threatened species in California, an endemic species, the Tule Elk. Due to overhunting, this species was down to something incredible, like only 10 or 12 individuals. And there was an idea to take some of these elk and put them inside of a reserve inside of Point Reyes National Seashore. So, sounds like the beginning of a happy story. Now, because of private ranching operations that, for a very, very complicated explanation, have been allowed to continue to operate their private businesses on the lands of a federally owned, publicly owned seashore, a fence was built that prevents these animals from free roaming because of the quote-unquote threat that they may or may not pose to these ranching operations and their profits. And that's the only reason. The elk reserve, or as activists call it, the elk prison within a national park, has been part of this Point Reyes National Seashore story since 1978. And over the years, some really ugly things have happened, some sad things, because animals that are trapped can't change their scenario. They can't migrate, they can't move to find better forage, they can't move to find different mates to strengthen their genetic line by dating outside of their immediate community. They can't find water. The habitat itself that was designated to the elk is not ideal, despite what the Park Service might tell you. I mean, the animals are wild animals that are celebrated for being wild and iconic for wild California, and yet they're all prisoners and not allowed to behave in a wild way. And this results in huge die-offs, like massive die-offs. Like approaching 50% of the entire population die-offs in years, which of course further dilutes the genetic pool because you have that tiny population that tries to repopulate within itself. Despite being a California Bay Area resident, I didn't learn about this until 2017 and really got involved in late 2017, 2018. And part of the first film I made about it documented the previous drought and die-off before I got involved, which was a very, very sad story. And part of that sad story was how the Park Service treated the scenario, how the Park Service would tell the public who actually were concerned that, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it, or we'll look into it if there's a problem. And, we're looking into remedies for this, which of course they weren't. Now, history repeated itself, and the public was a little wiser for the wear, and when the Park Service was providing their same old excuses, people didn't just shut up the way that they did before. They didn't just take the Park Service at their word, as they shouldn't, because the Park Service never did anything before. They didn't do anything the next time, despite the growing pressure. And then this happened again. And over time, we gained some momentum in exposing exactly how badly the wildlife in the park were being abused. And it doesn't seem to have a very good explanation other than catering to what the ranchers want to happen, because the ranchers complain about elk or any form of competition that might pose a threat to their profit margins. And yet that sounds ridiculous. I'm sure some of you out there say, oh, no, come on, ranchers allow wildlife on their land and all that. Well, this is a unique situation. I don't know what to tell you. These ranchers are giving wildlife friendly ranchers a bad name. So it's just the reality of the situation. There are documents on top of documents on top of documents of the ranchers writing in and saying that they want the elk killed, they want the elk removed. There were some axis deer that were eradicated, but the axis deer were not, in fact, native. So that's not nearly as crazy as the idea of wanting to get rid of what was supposed to be a wonderful recovery story for a native animal inside of a national park unit. So those of you who have recently tuned in and saw the videos in which I went out and filmed how the elk reacted once the troughs were brought in, what you need to understand in context is that the Park Service was being sued at the time to help the animals. Even as they brought the troughs out, they were fighting against bringing in or being court ordered to help the elk. So that should cause you to wonder, well, why did they bring in the water? And we believe that it was because they were being exposed on a national level for their lack of proper management, I guess you could say, for their negligence, for their mistreatment of the animals. And leading up to this, they were telling people over and over and over again in emails, on their website, in public statements, that the elk were fine, that the elk had plenty of water, going so far as to say that the elk wouldn't respond to the troughs because they were foreign objects and they had, quote, plenty of water from natural sources. But when the troughs did in fact go in, which seems to have been a publicity stunt, the elk did respond. And the elk responded immediately, which is, that's noteworthy considering that the Park Service actually thought that the elk would reject these foreign objects. And indeed, whether you think that the troughs would be an intimidating object or not, the fact that these wild animals did, in fact, go to these brand new sources of water rather than the supposed plentiful, those are the words of the Park Service, the plentiful sources of water, really says something. And as I hiked the 9 miles out to the point, it was the same story the whole way. These animals desperately needed water and they desperately need food. They desperately need non-toxic, non-invasive forage. Like I said, my involvement dates back to 2017, and here it is 2024, and we're dealing with the same old crap. Same old unresolved crap. Same old delays to actually make progress. Anyway, that's where we are.